Have you heard about queer theology and inclusive language? Today I'm interviewing Reverend Deana Dudley, a former Maritime and Admiralty lawyer in the USA. Deana became a clergy person and moved to Canada. She engages in spirited theological discussions and has a passion for spiritual journeys of all kinds. Combining her love of biblical studies with her hobby of biblical archeology, she enjoys exploring new perspectives to old meanings. Deana and I worked together for many, many years at Metropolitan Community Churches. Deana and I worked together for many years at Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. Deana, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Brandon. It's nice to be working with you again.
Yay. So Deana, can you tell us a little bit about your own coming out experience?
Well, I'll tell you, Brent. I was raised in a very conservative religious environment. Like you, I was a Baptist. So I didn't really know much about homosexuality, but I knew it was terrible. And in my teens, when let's just say I kissed a girl and I liked it, and I realized that, oh my gosh, I'm one of these horrible homosexuals. And I tried to suppress that in myself. I even went through attempted conversion therapy, not once, but twice. And I am incredibly glad that it appears that conversion therapy as of this day is illegal in Canada. Am I correct about that?
If not today, within hours, I think, yes.
Yes, awesome. That is a wonderful thing. It didn't take, but I ended up postponing coming out until I was in my late 20s. And when I did, the thing that was most on my mind was, how do I reconcile my sexuality, which is clearly not going away, with my spirituality, which is so important to me. That led to a lot of soul searching and studying. And that was my coming out experience. I didn't go to a gay bar. I went to the Library of Congress.
So Deana, how did those conversion therapy experiences impact you?
They made me not trust myself. They made me not trust my feelings or my own mind. Certainly having grown up in a conservative religious denomination, I was quite comfortable with the idea of someone else's opinions were way more important than mine. In terms of impact on me, it was horrible. At one point, I was speaking with a so-called peer counselor, someone who I suspect had absolutely no training or credentials, and said that I was feeling suicidal. And she said that that I would actually be better off dead than acting on my attraction to women.
God, can you just find it horrific? You know, I was similarly raised in a conservative Christian background, never had experienced conversion therapy or even heard about it or anything at all in my growing up years. But the horror stories, Deana, this is going to lead into my next question, but you're one of the most profound theologians and communicators of complex theology of anybody that I know. And over the years when we were working on sermons together, I'm not just being humble, because some people say humility is not one of my gifts, so I don't think they'd have expected of me. But I think, of those sermons over the years when you and I worked together, consistently the brilliant pieces were Deana's pieces, and what you brought to that planning. And so, I am so glad for me, for the church, for you, that you survived those experiences. So moving into the conversation about queer theology, how would you define queer theology? And how do you feel that queer theology gets used in ministry?
I think, first of all, let's talk briefly about the word queer. When I first started working at MCC Toronto, I think after my first sermon I preached, I got a call from your secretary, Brent wants to talk to you. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And so I tried to press him and he said, well, it's about language. And I said, oh my gosh, did I accidentally drop an F-bomb in the pulpit? No, it was about the word queer. I understand that not everyone wants to own that term. For me, it is an umbrella that encompasses a lot of who I am and encompasses a lot of who I think the queer community is. And I view it very, very expansively. For instance, in addition to LGBTQ, two-spirit, intersex, questioning, alphabet soup, I think it also encompasses straight people who want to get away from the fundamentalist learnings that they have internalized and want something more progressive and more expansive to view who they are in the world and who God is for them. Certainly in terms of my own ministry, queer theology is something that's kind of always in the back of my mind. There are traditional interpretations of the Bible, for instance, and I use queer theology to get beyond those interpretations and give myself alternatives. And I think this is true of many kinds of modern theology. It's Black and womanist theology. It's Native Indigenous spirituality. It's anything that serves as a lens, one of many lenses that we use to view biblical interpretation and spirituality. Does that help?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And in terms of inclusive language and the evolving nature of language, because I think way back when I was involved with the inclusive language battles within our denomination, Metropolitan Community Churches, it meant certain words or certain ways of speaking, where today it means something even more, and more words are being examined, et cetera. So for you, how would you define inclusive language, and why is it important?
Well, inclusive language is pretty much what it says it is. It is language that includes many perspectives, many points of view, many ways of looking at the same thing. It comes up, as you've noted, that there were some battles in our denomination over this in the 70s, 80s, thereabouts. And, at first it was, well, we have female ministers. So why do our bylaws always refer to ministers or ministry leaders as he? And, come to think of it, are we saying that God is always he? And we're not all men. We're not all women. I frequently would use they for God at this point, because I think God is way beyond gender, way beyond our limited notions. I've just been reading a wonderful resource, and I've misplaced it in my office, which is easy to do, but it's a lectionary that takes into account womanist and feminist perspectives, and it has some of the most wonderful translations and really solid translations that help us expand our notions of who God is. My thought is that inclusive language is not simply inclusive, it's expansive, because we cannot limit our understanding of God.
Yeah. And inclusive language also, I think, Deana, you'd agree, goes way beyond just gender issues in terms of
Absolutely.
language that includes or doesn't include people with disabilities, language that we use or don't use that includes people of color. There's lots of terminology and language that we just get used to. And I think sometimes we don't even realize until it's pointed out to us how exclusive the language is.
Yeah, and unfortunately, where it often shows up is in much beloved hymns. And that's something I'm acutely aware of as we move into the Christmas season. You can't mess with the first verse of a Christmas carol or an Easter hymn. The second verse, most people don't know them, and you can inclusify them. It's very hard to push against people's traditions, and because that pushes them out of their comfort zone.
So what advice do you have for congregations or faith communities that want to be more inclusive?
I'm reminded of a Peanuts cartoon where Linus explains something to his sister Lucy, something theological, I don't remember what, and she listens and says, "Thank you, I feel much better now." And Linus says, "Sound theology will do that for you." So I would say if you're wanting to be more inclusive as a faith community, then you need to look at the theological foundations of why this is important. And why it is important, there's many answers to that. First of which is, we've been taught to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that means we don't want to be putting our neighbors down. We don't want to be putting up barriers between them and God. And another thing is to understand that our understandings of language and our understandings of who is included have been shaped by people, perhaps very gifted and spiritual people, but people with all their human failings. And, the traditional stuff needs a hard second look.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that for a congregation to be inclusive, then some of the folks who've been around for a while need to give up some things. But if they do that, they'll take up much more.
Yeah, I agree. I think, for instance, even just something as simple as looking at all the ways in the Bible that God is described as a mother eagle, as the all-sufficient one, which, from Hebrew is basically the God of many breasts. And that some people find that notion upsetting. I find it freeing. I find it easier to think about what might the godly thing be to do in this situation if I have a much more expansive view of who God is and how God loves.
I remember years ago, Deana, I had a parishioner come into me, and he was, after attending MCC for a few years, he said, "Brent, I just can't relate to God. I just can't relate to this loving personal God that you keep talking about and stuff." And so, I don't know, out of the blue, I said to him, "What's your image of God?" And he said, "God is Father." And I said, "What was your relationship like with your father?" And he said he was abusive and he was mean, etc. And I said, "What was your relationship of your mother?" And he said, "She was loving and she protected me." And I said, "What would your image of God be like if you imaged God as a woman, as your mother, and not your father?" And he sat there and he cried and cried and cried. because for the first time he had this sense that the concept of God could be open to him if we just change the human ways of describing God. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people experience something like that. You know, the God that they've been taught about is, you know, judgmental and punishing. And one of the things that was most important to me when I first tried to reconcile my faith and my spirit and my sexuality was that as I studied, I discovered that what people told me about God was not necessarily who God is. I will go so far as to say that people lied to me about God.
Mm-hmm.
And I resent it.
Yep. And sometimes I think it's unlearning a lot of what the church has said or taught us, and in order to be able to embrace a different view of God, of church, of what it means to be a person of faith. So from your many years of pastoring at Metropolitan Community Churches in the US and in Canada, what have you observed around the impact of religious-based discrimination, religious-based homophobia, religious-based transphobia, on the impact that has on LGBT people? And what do you think are some of the most helpful ways to assist people trying to survive that?
Well, I think the impact of religious-based discrimination against LGBT people has been absolutely horrendous. I am not exaggerating when I say that people have died because of it, and that is horrific. And I think most of the discrimination against queer folks has almost exclusively as its basis a religious argument. And I've heard you say very many times that you have to combat a religious argument with a religious or spiritual response. And I agree with you on that. You know, I think what has been helpful for me, and part of it is just my quirkiness as a Bible geek. I find studying, you know, figuring out that what people have said about the clobber passages ain't necessarily so, and figuring out that there are other ways of interpreting these things. And, you know, I've found a number of books helpful. There's a book called Steps to Recovery from Bible Abuse that's helpful. I think associating yourself with a community of people who are willing to sit down and go through this process of unlearning with you and of finding new ways of understanding God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any other resources besides this YouTube channel, of course?
Of
Are there any
course.
other resources out there that you're aware of that would be helpful for people in terms of healing their relationship with God or with organized religion?
Yeah, and again, this is just my own geekiness. This is one of my favorite books. It's called The Queer Bible Commentary. And one of the things it does is it helps us look at biblical passages and understand that we are part of the story too. You know, our presence in the Bible has been suppressed and not taught to us. I think it's helpful to be able to see ourselves in the story. So things like that. I also have a book here on my shelf. Whoops, are we still there?
Yep.
Okay. This actually used to be on your shelf, Brent. I borrowed it and haven't returned it yet. It's called Torah Queries. In particular, it's looking at the Hebrew Bible passages that have been used against us, and it's fabulous. Let me know if you want it back.
So Deana, if people want to hear more from you or hear more of you or see you preach or see you lead worship, where would they go? When did that happen?
Well, they would come to the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, either in person or online. We have a YouTube channel and our services are all live streamed. And as a matter of fact, I'm preaching this Sunday, December 12th, and preach about once a month there. But this is a kind of theology that all of our pastors are committed to, and committed to making our faith community more inclusive and more expansive.
Deana, I want to thank you for today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for many, many, many years of serving a variety of congregations, specifically Christos MCC and MCC Toronto, and for your many years of service. And Deana, I just want to close by saying there was a moment where I've been proud of you in many occasions, but probably the moment that stood out the most for me was the pastoral role that you played through all of the MacArthur situation and the serial killing and stuff and the discoveries. And, you know, you were trusted by the community, brought in on a variety of occasions, and you really ministered in a way that made me really proud at a distance. And so thank you for all of those years and for continuing to be as brilliant as you always were. And I would encourage people to check out Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. So, if you found this interview helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and really helps us a great deal. So again, Deana, thank you very much.